College football. It feels like it's become an American staple, surpassing baseball, maybe NBA basketball, beneath NFL football, but definitely has the hearts and minds of many people in America, specifically because it's the alma mater of people, or it's the wannabe alma mater of people. And it enthralls us from this first Saturdays in August until the beginning of January. It takes us straight into the new year where we look at the potential of young 18, 19-year-old guys ascending to stardom, ascending to glory, that this may be it. This may be the last moment where you can do the last pure athletic thing on the highest level of competition. On today's podcast, we're bringing in guys that are fans of football in general. So these guys love the pro game and they love the amateur college game. And at first, I have Al. He's an alumnus of the University of South Carolina. He's a Gamecock fan. He's also a Dolphins fan. I have Jay, who's next. Jay is an alumnus of App State, a fan of App State football, and he's also a Carolina Panthers fan. And then finally, we have Matt. He's an alumnus of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, but he's also a University of North Carolina football fan, and he's a Panthers fan. These guys are going to bring their best to this conversation, and I look forward to doing it. Let's go. Wanted to take a quick time to kind of cover some stuff that is worth discussing, right? And I feel like podcasting is like the actual digital social media in a different sense. You know what I mean? It's not like it's not empty where I can say crazy stuff and nobody can come back at me. Like they coming back at me and they have to think.
Yeah.
Because Matt is a coach from he coaches at a high school in Charlotte, and in Cabarrus County. I think he's in Cabarrus County.
He is in Cabarrus County.
Yes, he's in Cabarrus County. He's a football coach, and I thought, and I think, I don't know. Are you a Carolina fan?
I'm glad.
For me,
I'm glad you dropped the North off of that, because we all talked about it. Yeah, Carolina, correct.
Well, it's interesting because my other friend Al is he and I went to South Carolina my first year in college. And in South Carolina, they call it Carolina. So that's just a discussion in itself, right? And Jay went to App, but I know basketball-wise, Jay is a Tar Heel.
I am.
So I've read Jay is going to be like the Stuart Scott part 2, but he's going to be Jay Boyd. So he won't be Stuart Scott. He'll be Jay, but he'll be like, man, he feels like Stuart because the dude's good. Like I follow Jay on Twitter, and he has solid commentaries. Like I watched when you were commenting during basketball season and football season, and you're in tune with it. So I think that's clearly what your passion is. So I wanted to make sure you were on this as well.
I appreciate that.
So I got 2 quick topics. My boy Al, who's a Gamecock, he'll have obviously a SEC bias and a South Carolina bias as well. He will be coming in about 5 minutes. He said he's on his way home. But the 2 questions are: is college football a superior product overall compared to the NFL? And then the value of preseason polls. I have opinions on both, but I think I want to hear guys that, one, like Jay is a graduate at App State, and a team that rose into the legitimacy in Division I football. And I know Matt is a high school coach, so he puts guys into college, and also probably has a college affiliation. So I feel like these are discussions that are worthy of having, first, about the experience, but second, about polls, because I don't know if it's strong, but I have an opinion specifically about that as well. So if anybody wants to field that first question of which experience is superior, the collegiate experience overall or the NFL experience. And when I say that, I mean I include the stadium experience inside and outside, the game product itself, like competitiveness, quality, and the post-game experience.
Okay. For me, I don't have a ton of experience. Since Charlotte didn't have football when we were there. My college football, actually, I went to more App State games when I was in college than anything else because I had some buddies there. I was actually at the first national championship game, and I always enjoyed those. I feel like if they had been there when I was at Charlotte, obviously that makes it a little more of a football atmosphere, even though they're not yet a great football school. Moving in the right direction, but not there yet. And so atmosphere wise, you probably get a more on average lively crowd, I think, in a college stadium than you do in a pro stadium, with the exception of like a Seattle, who's pretty famous for how rowdy their crowd gets, or like a playoff game, like a home playoff game. Obviously, you're going to have a pretty, just because the stadiums on average are bigger, even though the biggest college stadiums are bigger than the pro stadiums. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think on average, college probably a little more lively, but the NFL might have a higher ceiling for individual games, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
And Jay?
I don't know. That's kind of a tough one. I would probably lean in the college direction just because I feel like there's some regionalism there that NFL can't always tap into. Of course, being from the Charlotte area, we've always been, my mom went to Carolina, so we were always big Heels fans growing up. And then the Panthers were right there, so we always cheered for the Panthers. But even with that being the case, I always felt like the regionalism of being a Carolina fan in a state with Carolina and Duke and NC State, and then becoming a part of the App State family, that regionalism is so strong because even if you're not affiliated with those universities, like I'm still in Boone to this day, and the people around here that feel so empowered by what App State does on a football field is so insane to me because there's so many Floridians here that went to FSU, went to University of Florida, even a lot of big UCF fans, and even they can become involved in the football atmosphere that Boone can bring to Appalachian State and that university. So I would probably have to lean that as far as a passion, a college football passion might be unmatched by any sport.
And I think it's interesting because I was fortunate to go to an SEC school, and then I went to a university that didn't have football, but I did go to I've gone to ACC games too. And one of the things that I noticed is just that the reason I personally think the college experience is better is because there's what Jay said, the sort of the regionalism of it, but it's the experience where you don't actually have to go inside the game to feel it. Like tailgating at a college football game it's to me it's incomparable to anything I've been to. I've been to a tailgate where I didn't even want to go in the game because the tailgate was so good. And this accounts for at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, but I also went to Rutgers, New Jersey. And I went to a Rutgers game, and it was insane, just the environment that was there. And I thought it was amazing because Matt mentioned something that I thought was really amazing. I got a friend, Coach Garner, over. I think he's at Huss now, and he is a huge Seattle Seahawks fan. And I went with him to a Panthers game, but they were playing the Seahawks. It was the year the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, as a matter of fact. And the Seahawks, the 12th man, had a tailgate. That tailgate was on par with a college tailgate. But I think it goes with what Matt said about just sort of the way the fans of Seattle function. You agree or no?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the tailgate is a huge part of it, and that can the variance in tailgates, like the Carolina games I've gone to, the tailgates. Some of my walk paths were very kind of that wine and cheese crowd. In your 50s, that's probably
right.
Whereas you're a college kid, you're in your 20s, then probably not. I've had the experience a couple times. A buddy of mine played at Pitt and was an All-American, played in the NFL for a little bit, and we coached together. So anytime Pitt would come down to play at Chapel Hill, we would go to the game. And so I got to kind of tag along with him, even though it's like, so I'd be the only guy at like a Pitt tailgate, like legit, pretty badass, like alumni tailgate, but I'm in like Carolina gear, you know what I mean? Always friendly and stuff, but definitely a good time. So yeah, I think that the college tailgate probably is better, right? Especially, I guess it kind of varies. It's definitely cheaper to go to a college game, right?
Yes.
And I think that factors in that gets you a little more of like a blue collar crowd, I guess, if you want to word it that way.
Right,
and be a little rowdier than your wine and cheese crowd.
And Jay, I want to ask you a question because I think it's valid. Like, since you're not too far removed from the college tailgate, college football lifestyle, I remember my tailgates when I was in university and when I left, and they were different. But the experience in a tailgate as a student was like second to none. Was that your experience as well?
Oh, for sure. The game day as a whole, app is very prideful about their football team, and the university and the community has definitely hopped on that. So a game day around here, you can feel it. I think that definitely provides something for the college crowd and the college product. You can't feel it as much at an NFL game. I've been to plenty of Panthers games, and I pull up 30 minutes before the game and go sit in my seat and watch the game and go home. Before a college game, it's an all-day experience. You go tailgate that morning, go hang out with your friends, see what they're up to, maybe grab a couple of burgers off of somebody's grill, and then we're all walking to the stadium together. We're pumped to see our team play, and then we yell for 3 hours and go home and talk about the game some more. Like, it's an all-day experience. So I think, yeah, there's definitely something to add about that tailgating experience and there being like an atmosphere to a football game in college that NFL might not be able to compete with.
Right, and so my buddy Al jumped on. I'm letting him jump in, and with the question of which experience is a superior overall experience, the college football whole game experience, or the NFL dealing with stadium experience inside and out, the game product itself, the game, the competitiveness, the quality, and the post game. So Al, you can go ahead and jump in. I shared a little bit of what the bias you may have, but I'd let you speak for yourself.
Oh, I wouldn't have any bias, Lewis. No, but I go to a lot of NFL games. I've gone to a lot with Louis when his cousin played. And, of course, I'm a season ticket holder for college as well. And my preference would be college. It seems like the tailgating atmosphere, the in-game experience when you go to a college stadium, especially an SEC stadium, which I've been to like almost all the SEC stadiums. And when compared to when you go to a Panther game and you have fans behind you getting upset that you're standing up and cheering.
Yeah, I think that's something that they're taking into account too, because I feel like all you guys have probably been to a pro game. And do you think that the pro game, the crowd at least is more constrained as far as like sort of the excitement factor that they show? Anybody can start.
Oh, absolutely. If you're not like a 10-year-old kid trying to get your Cam jersey signed, the fans at an NFL game do not want you to make any noise whatsoever. They are so concerned about being able to see every angle of the field and being able to hear every corny song that comes over the speakers. There is definitely a different fan experience at an NFL game. I don't think they want half as much passion in those stands as the fans at a college game do. Even if you're a 50-year-old alumni at a college game, it seems like they're always down to get rowdy.
Oh, yeah.
Just speaking from my college experience.
Anybody else or no? Yeah, I think so you must have better pro seats than I do. Most of it really, like, it's kind of tough. Like I said, I've been to Carolina games. I've never been to South Carolina games. That was just a dig. No. No, it's been my experience. It's funny, college games are more consistently high energy. I think part of that too is the overall age of the crowd. Like, I'm 33, so I'm not an old guy by any means, but I definitely can't. I don't see me anymore. Like I've been at college games where I did stand for 3 hours and yell. And like the idea of doing that now is like, man, I don't know that I would enjoy that. Like, to be honest, maybe I'm soft. I don't know. But he's right as far as the pro crowd goes. Like, if you're trying to get like, I'd like to say that I'm at least a relatively decent heckler, and like trying to get like chants started and stuff at a pro game, it's kind of tough. Whereas in a student section, if it's a decent chant, you got some support.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that I think matters is the competitiveness of the game. And I think that matters because in the NFL game, I really feel like you really don't know what you're going to get when the teams step out on the field. But I feel like there's a greater – if, for instance, if you're going to an app game or if you're going to a Gamecock game, I think you know what you're going to get specifically based on knowing who the opponent is, right?
So you cut out on me a little bit right there. So I imagine it was a very good comment or question, but could you repeat it?
Oh. No, well, I was saying, I think that as far as the quality of the game, like normally when you're going to a game, you know what you're going to get in college. Like if South Carolina is about to get, if the play the Saints, you may or may not know. And I feel like there's sort of an ambiguity that exists in the pro game that's different than the college game.
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely a closer slate of games weekly in the NFL than there is in college. Even when you're in conference play, there are a couple of teams in your conference that aren't going to give you too much of a fight. App State plays in the Sun Belt. So in our last couple of years here, we've been pretty dominant. And we've been to 3 bowl games while I've been here. The first year we weren't eligible to go. But in those 3 years, we pretty much knew on a weekly basis, unless we're playing Georgia Southern, who's our rival, Arkansas State, who's consistently good, or one of the other few teams in the Sun Belt who can compete on a regular basis. We probably got us a blowout in here. So we're probably just going to have fun at this game and go home halfway through the fourth.
Yeah, I agree. I think that each time you step up a level of competitiveness, there's a lot more parity. As a guy who's coached on plenty of high school teams, that I've had a pretty good idea what the result was going to be before kickoff. Not often in our favor. You do, and if you look at like the spreads in Vegas, right? A double-digit or 20-point spread in college is not uncommon. It's never happened in the NFL, right? Or if it has, it's to hit 20 points. That's 2 or 3 times in history, maybe. So that the NFL, you're going to get a more consistent, competitive product. Whereas, college, here you go. For apps that for every one app beating Michigan, right, which was awesome. You have, Clemson blowing out, right, a dozen times. So it's a lot,
right? And so, but that for me, that go ahead.
But yeah, well, people. That's the other thing too, though, right? If you
have
a game,
Al, did you have?
If you have an NFL game that ends, 17-14, it was a tight game, but people were probably like, oh, there weren't many points. Whereas if you have a college game that's 42-7, it's a blowout, but people, had a blast because it was just touchdowns on touchdowns on touchdowns, right? I think people would rather see a track meet.
But for me, I think the question is, Right. And so for me, my question is that wouldn't you think that knowing a game is going to be more competitive would bring more juices out of the fan base?
Which side are you on? Which side of the blowout are you on?
Well, I don't mean blowout. I mean like in a tight game. So, for instance, if college football games are going to be blowouts, but the energy is much higher there, and you go to an NFL game and you're sort of like biting your fingernails, you would for me, logic says that would be a more exciting game because you don't know the outcome. So you would have a little more energy. But it doesn't seem that happens that way. It seems to happen in the reversed way.
If you're a fan of a team that's going to compete for a national championship, one loss devastates your season. Whereas if you're a team that's competing for a Super Bowl, you could lose 4 or 5 games in a season, and it's not the end of the world, right? So one loss isn't as punishing, which I know will lead into another topic, and we'll get to that. But yeah. But so I think that as far as like you said, biting your fingernails and being nervous, if you're a Clemson or an Alabama or an Ohio State or somebody where that one loss really can potentially be make or break for you and have a shot to get to the playoffs, yeah, that puts you on a little more pins and needles, even if you're expecting to win by 30.
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that because even when the Panthers went, when the Panthers went 15-1, 15, that might have been the most stressful season of football I can remember watching in my life. 15-1 for that Panthers team, and they were not blowing teams out. Those were close games for the majority of them. That was super stressful. So I think maybe that can be said for the majority of the fans in the stadium that, of course, you expect to compete at a high level, but since it's not as easy as it is at the college level in the NFL, there's some nervousness there in that stadium.
So you think people take the games, and anybody can answer, do you think that people take the games in the NFL more seriously than college games?
I'd say more serious in college. Yeah, I mean the fans anyway.
Really?
I've been to a Kentucky stadium and seen fans pull their pants down, saying suck these. I've been to LSU and seeing 2-year-old little girls jumping around yelling Tiger Bait, and I've seen Ole Miss fans, 50-year-old men crying after the game. So, I mean, I think when it comes to fan bases, you're not going to see NFL fans acting like the college fan bases. The ones that take it serious anyway, like, when you just compare apples to apples.
That's fair enough. And that kind of does lead me into the next point that I had that Matt alluded to. The second part was about preseason polls. And so I did some research and report that Bleacher Report did, and it said over the past 10 years that two times the teams that were ranked number 1 and 2 went wire to wire number 1 and 2, but the polls actually showed that about 6 and the bowl game wins correctly. And so I asked that because the top 5 of the 2019 preseason poll is number 1 Clemson, number 2 Alabama, number 3 Georgia, number 4 Oklahoma, and number 5 Ohio State. Now, I don't follow college football as much as I did in the past, but based on the last year's polls, it looks like they're just kind of mimicking what happened last year. How accurate do you think the polls are? And second, do you think the polls have a value? Because my opinion is I think the polls actually kind of dilute the game a little bit at the beginning, or sensationalize it actually is a more correct word.
Yeah, I don't think they should even rank the teams until at least 4 or 5 weeks into the season.
Yeah, that's kind of the boat I'm in, and I would guess, and I've not crunched any numbers on this, but I'm guessing that if you look at like the top 25, I bet the top 10-ish teams at the beginning of the season don't change a whole lot. Whereas, 11 through 25, you probably do have a lot of shifting there because it's not clear cut who the best teams are. And, you get a key injury here or there, couple teams catch some breaks. And so you have some shifting at the bottom. You don't have a ton of shifting at the top, except for the fact that one loss again tends to drop somebody 8 spots, which is kind of wild. And yeah, I totally agree. I think preseason polls, if anything, is you don't have to be good as long as somebody thinks you're good. Because then if they think you're good, a loss isn't as punishing. I mean, look at UCF, right? I know they don't play a super difficult schedule, but if they go wire to wire undefeated, it doesn't matter because, the voters don't think they're good enough to be considered that even without a loss, right? So then you get these guys who aren't ranked as high, and it doesn't matter. So they literally, almost at the beginning of the season, it does not matter what they do. They don't have a shot.
And Jay, do you have one? Because I know you being an App State alumnus, you can probably directly.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of with these guys. I don't really think that there's much need for a preseason poll, especially as early as now, and the ones that come out like directly after the national championship, like the way too early polls that are like mid-January. They're trying to tell me who's going to be the week one number one. Don't really care for those polls, but I do think something that's added some level of excitement to the college football system is the college football playoff. With it only being 4 teams, they have their own ranking system. So of course, there's always going to be the AP poll that everybody goes off of, and the coaches poll that everybody likes to look at. And those come out as preseason polls along with like ESPN and Bleacher Report and whoever else decides to do one. But the college football playoff poll actually doesn't begin until week 6. So that's like the TV show that they do on ESPN every week after the 6th week of the season, because it's like the halfway point of the college football season, where they'll start giving the rankings 1 through 25, who the college football committee thinks is the best 25 teams in the country after that week. So then I think I do like that poll. I mean, it tells me at least a little bit what the committee is looking at as far as putting somebody in a college football playoff. And of course, the last couple of years, there's been some controversy as that last season comes up, because the week before, that's of course the most anticipated poll other than the week before bowl games begin, because you're trying to figure out who's going to which bowl and which teams are going to play for a national championship. And teams have been upset, that the Big Ten hasn't been getting their spot in the championship. And I definitely agree with Matt's point that top 10 is pretty consistent. That top 10 teams, if we were to bracket them, and then 11 through 25, I think that top 10 would stay pretty close to the top, if not just a little bit of shifting. And then 11 through 25, there might be 7 other teams that are thrown in those spots before the end of the year comes. But yeah, that poll that college football playoff does is pretty good.
A thing that I found really interesting, and Al and I have had conversations about this in the past. I remember the couple of years that South Carolina was basically living in the top 10 when they had Jadeveon Clowney and Lattimore. And I felt like if they waited until maybe week 5 or whenever conference play opened and started ranking teams then, I think they would have gotten a more accurate poll. And so my preference actually is to wait until conference play starts, because I think conference play really, really matters in the polling. But I think the motivation behind having the polls this early, do you think that what do you think is the rationale behind having these?
Oh, it's driven by clicks, right? Like everything is now. It's if you get clicks on your website, you can sell ads, and if you put polls out, people want to read it because people want football 365.
Pretty much.
Very true. Very true. Hey, Al, do you have anything? Oh, okay. Jay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you scroll your social media timeline, how often do you see 60 days till football, 30 days till football, 1 week till football? It's people are ready for it.
Great.
Oh yeah, I agree with all of that, because like you look at Alabama.
Jay, did you have anything or no?
No, I was just agreeing with those guys for sure. It's definitely for clicks. I mean, we tried to do. I worked on campus trying to do some one-on-one interviews with athletes on App State's campus, and that was one thing that we were really big on, trying to preview the season and trying to preview upcoming games and stuff. Like previews and polls, they just give us something to talk about during the dead season.
It lets us have this conversation.
Yep.
And
I was saying I agree with
right, and
everything
Al,
y'all are
what were you
saying.
saying?
You know, like the clicks on the website, the same thing with ESPN. Right now, the thing is Alabama, Clemson, number 4, however many times they played in the playoffs. So they're pushing Alabama and Clemson on ESPN every day. I mean, it's the same thing.
But doesn't that kind of cheat? Doesn't that kind of cheat? You talking Alabama, Clemson, and say both teams lose a game because they've been put so high in the echelon and in the minds of people that they're going to try to find a way to make sure they get into that top 4, even if they have losses. The perfect example is Ohio State, and I don't want to use about wanting to get into the playoff. And when they do play, they get like smacked in the face. So I feel like that matters, right? And hear me, or I don't know if my
It broke up.
cut out or not.
Yeah, it cut out.
Oh, okay. I was saying, I think that the other teams should feel slighted or feel like a disservice where there's so much of a narrative of Alabama and Clemson there and sticking them at 1 and 2. They likely deserve it, but in the same breath, it steals away from the other teams who could potentially be in the 1 and 2, because at the end of the season, I feel like there's a push to make sure that those 1 and 2 guys stay in the top 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it because you look at,
Al go
say,
first.
Clemson, if they lose the first week to Texas A&M, they're already number 1. How far do you think they're really going to drop? 6, 7, 8, maybe? They're still going to be in the top 10. And then they screen through their schedule where they don't play anybody ranked, I don't think, the rest of the year, and finish still in the top 4 and go to the playoff. Whereas if they would have not been ranked, start ranking teams in the 4th or 5th week and they lose a game in the first week, they're not even going to be ranked in the top 10. I mean, it's different ways to look at it.
Right.
Yeah, the later you get in the season, the more punishing a loss is. One loss is not, a loss in week 2 is not the same as a loss in week 12, right? Even though they're both one loss, they're not. It just gets heavier the later you get, I think.
Oh, definitely. Like Georgia last year.
Yeah, exactly.
Jay, what about you?
Absolutely agree with that. Like Alabama being put up in the top. The first 4 games of the Alabama football season this year are Duke at Alabama, New Mexico State, who used to be in the Sun Belt, at Alabama. Alabama has to go on the road to play a conference opponent in South Carolina, who's unranked, and Southern Miss at Alabama. So Alabama's most likely, we would all suspect, going to skate through all of those games, maybe have a little bit of a competition for a quarter and a half with South Carolina, and then go into conference play ready to kill. And they'll be the number 2 team. And then the first ranked opponent they'll play will be week 6 versus Texas A&M, if Texas A&M can keep up what we think they're supposed to do. So teams like, people always say that, there's an SEC bias by ESPN and stuff like that, but they are definitely blessed in a way with them being able to ride through the SEC conference and then getting that week, I think it's the week 11 break in the SEC, where they play a mid-November game against whoever it is. This year, the South Carolina week 11 game is against App State, so they don't get a week off, but there's definitely a level of bias given to those teams at the top where they're able to slide around a lot more, seeing as though they can have one tough game in the first 4 and slide on for a couple of weeks.
And I think an interesting point about is, for instance, South Carolina, because I just kind of normally know they play Alabama this year. They play Appalachian State, who's an up-and-coming and noticeable team, and then they play Clemson at the end. Now, say South Carolina beats Alabama and has a tough game but pulls out one against App State and loses to Clemson. Like where, but then the rest of the season they do what they're supposed to do. They win the ones they're supposed to win, and maybe they lose one or two in there. Like how would they compare because they start the season as an unranked team? I'll let Al go first because I know
it'd probably
personally attached.
Be top 20-ish, something like that. I mean, I don't think being unranked with the tough schedule they have, I don't think it matters that much. The more with the rankings situation, it's more of how far you're going to drop. But say for instance, this is not going to happen. But say South Carolina went undefeated, lost the last game against Clemson. That would be the scenario where you're talking about where it would hurt them and not have them in the top 4.
Which is wild, right?
Which wouldn't you think is amazing? That doesn't make any sense because if they ran the table and they just only lost to Clemson, that would be amazing that they don't make the top 4.
Oh yeah, but they played in the SEC. But then I don't think South Carolina would get that exact. I know the schedules aren't apples to apples, but I don't think they would get the exact same. Yeah, well, they ran the table in the SEC. Oh, but they lost. You know what I mean? I think it'd be more damning to them simply because people go, oh, they're not as good, even if they did run the table.
You're correct. They would use Alabama's in the SEC West. They're the tougher division, even though I think South Carolina's schedule currently is ranked number 1 by ESPN. They get the top teams in the country.
Well, they open up with the top.
South Carolina has an extremely hard schedule. They play Carolina to start off the year. I believe that one's at a neutral site. Then they get Alabama week 3. They get Kentucky week 5. Then they go to Georgia. Then they get Florida at home. Florida's ranked top 10, I think, right now in preseason polls. Then they're going to play App State for their week 11, which is supposed to be the SEC off week. And then they get Texas A&M at Texas A&M, and then Clemson at South Carolina. If they run the table on that schedule and don't make top 4, we're going to have to talk. Because, oh my goodness, that is a hard schedule.
It is, but there's always if you're supposed to be good, they won't let the conference championship punish you. But if you're not that good, even if you win it, they don't let it really be a reward, right?
That's true, but we're saying if they can beat that schedule and then win the SEC East, they meet Alabama in the SEC championship game, and by an act of God, they beat Alabama twice. Yeah. If they don't make top 4, then we're gonna have to call the committee. I'll call them on South Carolina's behalf.
Yeah, I'm not. You know what? I'm a Carolina fan, but you know what? You patch me into that phone call. I'd have to back on that because that is just batshit insanity. But even if, let's say they beat Alabama the first time, they run the table, they lose the conference championship. Then I agree, but then do you think people
It'd still be close.
They still should be in the top 4.
They give them the Dennis Green and they go, see, they are who we thought they were, right? And
I think that would be the case.
Maybe 3 lost Notre Dame should be in instead.
That's fair. We've seen that before. Yeah. If Notre Dame, independent conference, Notre Dame gets in over South Carolina to beat Bama, we're gonna have to talk.
So in another scenario, say South Carolina loses to Alabama, which they shocked them before, but say they lose to them, and then they run the table and beat Clemson at the end, an undefeated Clemson. Do they make the bowl game because they start the season unranked?
With 9 straight wins going into the SEC championship?
So imagine they like do they get in the top 4? Because I feel like that's the top. You lose to Alabama, who you were supposed to lose to, and then you run the table and you beat the other ranked teams you're supposed to beat, and you beat Clemson, who, if they're undefeated at that time, would be number 1.
Depends on what Ohio State
and go into the SEC title. Like how?
He's not wrong. He's not wrong.
So, but this is why I feel like the preseason polls are terrible, and you should wait until the conference play starts.
It's a bad system in general, right? It's a little better than it was. At least they have to play a game to win a title now, right? It's not just newspaper writers going, you know what, Army really was good this year.
The reason I think that is because I remember, I think, was it last year? App State had a really, really good season, or it was the year before. And I think they only had and they should have been in a BCS
Yeah, last
bowl,
year App
and they
State
didn't
made
get
the
one.
poll. I'm not sure what week it was. I want to say week 8, and they were playing their rival Georgia Southern on the road as they entered the top 25, and they got smacked on the road. Their starting quarterback went down in the first series, but they got smacked on the road, and that was the end of their poll hopes.
Yeah, it's kind of it's the opposite of the Eli Manning effect, right? You get credit based on your name. They didn't get enough. He probably gets too much, right? It's Penn State that it's brand recognition.
Fair enough.
Was it the Penn State game last year? The Appalachian State should have won. They kind of gave it away at the end.
The overtime game at Penn State. Yeah, that was the season opener.
Yeah, and dude, I watched the end of that. That was exciting.
I just think it's unfair because, in the sense of, I just think what it does is, in the history of polls, has a team ever not ranked in the top 25 finished in the top 5 to end the season if they ran the table?
I don't know. Was when LSU got left out of the national championship? I mean, well, I guess they were ranked preseason pretty high.
Well, the Southern Cal Oklahoma game, was that the?
I think that's a great question. Somebody outside the 25 ran the table unless it was UCF the first time, right? You know what? Undefeated probably.
But did they finish in the top 5?
Heck, it may have been Auburn all the way back with Cadillac Williams and Ronnie Brown when they went undefeated and didn't make the national title.
I don't know if they started outside the top 25 though.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It might have been one of those Boise State teams that went with Kellen Winslow.
Ooh, Kellen Winslow, a very different guy.
Really?
Kellen Moore, yes, not Kellen Winslow.
Kellen Moore would not appreciate the comparison.
Yeah, he would be very upset right now. Yes, Kellen Moore. It might have been one of those teams because I know they were coming out every week and giving somebody a hard time, and they ended up pretty high in the polls. They even went to a Fiesta Bowl one year, so it might have been one of those teams.
Yeah, they came out of nowhere to be really good.
But
or one of the did they run the table though? I think that was the question, right? Out of the top 25 and ran the table.
Yeah, they I think they went undefeated for 2 seasons.
Well, I remember them
the Boise State
losing the first game of the year the next year after winning that Oklahoma Fiesta Bowl. Yeah, I can't remember who.
Yeah, you're right.
But they pretty much went undefeated one year and lost one game the next year.
But it's amazing because they ran the table and they made a BCS bowl.
I remember Hawaii going undefeated one year and not even being top 8 or 10.
Oh, yeah. Was that Colt Brennan or somebody was there?
Yeah.
Still June Jones coaching? Yeah.
Yep. And then they played Georgia the following year, the first game, and got whipped.
Yeah, and didn't they – was it the next year that they played – it might have been – was it them in Oklahoma or somebody in Fiesta Bowl and Hawaii got absolutely smacked?
Yeah, I think so.
Oof.
Let's see that, and I just think that's an advocation that the polls are actually hurting teams with potential because people don't even notice those teams. I'm not saying that Hawaii should have been in the national title game or Boise State should have been, but I mean, at least let them get punched in the face by a powerhouse, in the playoff, so you can say, hey, you
I'd
earned
rather
this
see that than
right?
watching Clemson beat Ohio State 31-0. At least we gave another team a shot.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is that speaking of Ohio State, I think Matt mentioned the Big Ten. The Big Ten, I mean, they put players in the pros. I give them credit for that. But I mean, as a football conference, I'm not really impressed with them because every time they're called to the carpet, to show that they are top tier quality, they get embarrassed. So I'm confused on why they have such a push for wanting to be included in the playoffs. Does anyone know? I'll let Matt start this one.
And Michigan and Ohio State are traditionally good, right? So then that means they're in the same conference and they've been around forever and they put guys in the pros, therefore they are good. Whereas you have a team like I referenced him earlier, like my buddy that played at Pitt, right? He played on a team with Revis and Larry Fitzgerald and some of the Flacco was there, right, for a little bit. And, they put tons of guys in the pro, Jeff Otah, all on the same roster. But, that doesn't, necessarily a good college football team make, right? And so I think it's, they put guys in the pros and they're traditionally good.
Jay
therefore, their conference is good.
I guess their argument would be that
Jay, what do you
they
think?
just don't want to be left out of a playoff that includes two teams from one conference. And since the Pac-12 has been so far behind the other Power 5 conferences, they want to be included instead of Clemson getting the go and everybody complaining about how weak their schedule was, and Alabama getting the go with one loss and everybody complaining about how weak their schedule was. And then last year they don't have to worry about Georgia getting in because Alabama shuts them down and gets in there. But I guess their argument is that they don't want to see two teams from one conference when they're getting left out and Ohio State's killing somebody in the Big Ten tournament, in the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis every year.
I mean, I think it's a lot to do also,
and Al, what do you think?
With, the clicks on the web pages and how popular Ohio State and Michigan are. I mean, you got the Desmond Howards and the I can't even think of his name, Kirk Herbstreets on air that are pumping Michigan and Ohio State every year. So even if they lose to a Purdue by 50 points, they're still going to be pumped up. Well, they only had one loss. They should still go over a one-loss Georgia team that didn't win their championship against Alabama,
Right. So I'm gonna close up with this one, and I think it's intentionally done because it's about clicks, right? So the top five right now is Clemson, Alabama, Ohio. No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Ohio State. Which one of the five drops out of there, and which one do you think are the final two? So I'll let Jay start.
Well, if I had to pick final two, I'm going to stick with Clemson and Alabama. I think they've kind of proven they're the top dogs in college football as of right now. I don't think anybody's going to be knocking Clemson around anytime soon with Trevor Lawrence for the next 2 years and the defensive line that they have. And Nick Saban being who he is in Alabama, I don't think they're going to have too much trouble. So if I had to say one of the teams that was going to knock out of the top five, I guess I'd go with Oklahoma, just because we're pretty much putting Oklahoma in the top five, thinking that Jalen Hurts is going to do amazing things at Oklahoma, but we have never seen him in that type of offense before because they're an air raid, get the ball down the field. They are not a nickel and dime offense like Alabama is that's just going to run up your gut and throw one skip pass, for 20 yards every once in a while. So we're definitely going to get a different look at him this year in Oklahoma. So if I had to pick one, I'd say the other four are pretty consistent. I'd say Oklahoma.
Okay, and Al, what do you think? So who would you see as the final two, and who drops out of that top five?
I would go with Alabama and Clemson as well. Just if you look at Clemson's schedule, they could slip up against one of the two ranked teams they play and still win their championship easily and make the top two, make the Final Four. And then I would go with Ohio State knocking them out because they have a new quarterback that transferred from Georgia that only played, a couple games and sparingly last year for Georgia, so you don't really know what he's going to be. I just think that Ohio State's going to drop down.
All right, and Matt, what do you think? The top two out of that, and who drops out?
So the top two are going to be UCF. No, I'm just kidding. It's Bama and Clemson, right? I mean, I know it's a boring pick. It's chalk, but I mean, they've like you said, they've earned that. No one yet has really kind of shown that they're going to knock one of those two off. I think the one that drops, I don't trust Ohio State, even though they don't play in a super strong conference. And I've got a lot of faith. Yeah, and now I don't have a lot of faith necessarily in Jalen Hurts because agreed, he hadn't played in that type. However, he was good enough to get recruited. Even though Alabama doesn't tend to recruit great quarterbacks, as far as to develop to go to the next level or to really sling it a whole lot, Oklahoma does. Back-to-back Heisman winners. I know they've been very, very talented players and athletes, but it's not like Hurts is bad. And so it seems like Oklahoma's coaching staff gets those guys, and every game in the Big 12 is a track meet anyway, right? And so they're going to score points. And because people love to see points get scored, I think that tips the voters a little bit when they can say, they might say, oh, they gave up, 35 a game, but they scored 60 a game. Oh, they are good, right? So I think Ohio State falls out. I think Oklahoma stays in, but I think, again, it comes down to Alabama and Clemson.
And I'm going to actually, based on listening to you, I'm going to come with the contrary of I think Georgia and Oklahoma will be the final two. And I actually think Ohio State, as agreed in the consensus, basically, I think it was one that was different that will drop out. For some reason, something about Georgia being under the radar but on the radar, and Oklahoma, I think the Jalen Hurts thing matters, and I think he'll perform to the contrary of that, and you have an ugly national title game between Oklahoma and Georgia, and I think it will ruin everyone's minds. It'll blow it all up. So I'm like the Joker in this, and I'm searching for chaos.
I hope you're right.
So parody in college football.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you so much for the conversation and the insights, and hopefully we get to do something like this again. Hopefully I get in a better spot for my Wi-Fi to work better. I really appreciate it. I appreciate Al, you being here representing the SEC in South Carolina. I appreciate Jade being here representing the App State and the Journalists of America. And I appreciate Matt being here representing the University of North Carolina and High School of America. So with that, I thank you, and I will talk to all of you guys in the very near future. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Lou, enjoyed it, man. We'll do it again soon.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. I just wanted to make sure I addressed something that I listened to as I was going through the editing process and checking for things. First, I'm aware of the delays that existed in some of the calls. This was the first call that I did, the first group podcast that I did in this way. So it was an interesting learning experience. The conversation was still excellent. And we'll keep getting better. Like, that's the purpose of doing these things, is trying and knowing that, hey, this works, this doesn't work. But what did work was the content of the podcast was absolutely stellar. And I look forward to you joining me on a podcast, and definitely appreciate anything you do for sharing it and also listening. So thanks for listening to the podcast.